middle of July. So I am here to talk about special education exiting and how it relates to graduation and dropout. I'm going to share my screen again, and I will turn off my camera. If you have questions along the way, feel free to put the questions in the chat, and we will answer them as we are able. Let me share my screen. I'm hearing an echo. Okay. I'm first going to talk about the special education exit detail report, and something that I didn't put on here, but was reminded of this morning, is that this report only updates over the weekend. So if you, excuse me, if you put in information into the special ed exit fields in the enrollment tab, for example, it won't update on the report until the following Monday. Just like the federal submission validation report, that's how this one works as well. And there's a whole story behind why that has to happen that way. So if you have questions about that, feel free to email me. But it's just the way the system works. So in order for a student to be on the SPED exit detail report, some things have to be in place. So first of all, the student has to be ages 14 to 21 inclusive on the December 1st prior to their exit. And yes, that is confusing, but that is the rules per US Ed. So if a student exits on December 2nd, 2023, then it's going to look at their age on the day before, on December 1st, 2023. But if they exit on November 30th, 2023, it'll look at their age on December 1, 2022. So it goes back to the December 1 prior to their exit. And honestly, that really only matters for 14-year-olds because otherwise they're going to fit into that category. A student has to have an IEP at the beginning of the school year when they enrolled, or had an IEP at the end of the previous school year but has a no-show enrollment this year. So they might have exited last year and not shown up this year. But if they had an IEP at the end of last year, they're still going to be on the report. And then the student had to be enrolled in a public school district in Kentucky on or before October 1st of the current school year, the reporting year. And then, and I'm going to bring up the report and show it to you. And I've already done a webinar on this, but I just want to add a few things just so everybody understands how the report works. So for a student to be reported on the special ed exit report, the student must have exited special education for one of these reasons. So what we found at the beginning of, well, not at the beginning, but this summer, I'm sorry, in the spring and summer when people were looking at the exit report, if the enrollment in status had not been updated by your district, and that's not typically the DOS's responsibility, it's the responsibility of somebody else. I don't know, maybe the enrollment clerk or the DPP, I don't know. But if that hasn't been done, the students are probably going to show up on that report, anyone who meets the criteria in the previous slide, but it'll say additional information needed. If that's the case, you don't need to worry about those kids. If the enrollment in status has not been entered, or the enrollment in date has not been entered, those kids are are likely going to be updated at some point in the near future. Okay, so we talked through transferred to regular education, graduated with a regular diploma, graduated with an alternate diploma, reached maximum age. This is one that gets a lot of people because when a student, for example, is in a Department of Juvenile Justice facility and they turn 18, then they age out of that facility. But reached maximum age is only for students who reach the maximum age for education, for special education services, and that's 21. If a student died, if they moved on to continue, or if they dropped out. And so this is how the calculations work for indicators 1 and 2. Only students who were included, and this changed about 2 years ago. So it's a relatively new calculation, and so I think it's caught some people off guard. Only students on the exit report are included in the graduation and dropout calculations. So it's only those students ages 14 to 21 had an IEP at the beginning of the school year, and then exited special education for one of those reasons. But OSEP requires that we only use the following students in the calculation. So in the denominator, graduated with a regular diploma, graduated with an alternate diploma, reached maximum age, or dropped out. So I'll show you the calculation. This is the calculation for graduation rate. So it's all students on the exit report who graduated with a regular diploma divided by all those other students. This doesn't include moving on to continue. It doesn't include students who died. It doesn't include students who transferred to regular education, which I wish it would, but it doesn't. So that's the calculation for graduation rate. And then dropout is very similar, except the numerator is dropped out. It has the same denominator. We're comparing it to the same group of kids, but it's graduated with regular diploma for indicator 1 or dropped out for indicator 2. Are there any questions about the calculations before I move on? Okay. All right, so on the SPED exit detail report, and I'm going to bring up the report and show it to you here in a second, but some things you need to look for. Disability, if it's blank, that's going to be a problem. So we'll need to talk through that. If you have a hard time figuring out how to get that to work, email me and I'll be happy to work with you on that. So there are some fields that people are getting confused about where they come from. And the disability, by the way, is coming from the IEP, not from the enrollment tab. So it's from the actual IEP. So the SPED exit status on enrollment, that's the name of the field in the report. So I'll just show you where that is on here. SPED exit status on enrollment. And I will send out this PowerPoint later. So that comes from the special ed exit status entered in the special ed fields in the enrollment tab. And I will try to bring that up and show you where that is in the report. The KDE determined SPED exit status comes from the enrollment in status on the actual enrollment form. And then the same is true for the date. So the SPED exit date on enrollment, this right here, is what was entered by, I assume it's the dose. I don't know. I think it might be different in every district, but that's what was entered in the special ed fields in the enrollment tab. And then the KDE determines SPED exit date comes from the enrollment status. So let me show you. Bring up an example of this. I apologize. Okay. So here's an example of a student. So the special ed exit status on enrollment is actually from, if you go down to the SPED, it would be right here on the special ed exit status where you can select one. So if you select graduated with diploma and then you select this, so that is the SPED exit status on enrollment. That's what this is. So those are the ones that you entered. The KDE determined special ed status or SPED exit status looks at this right here, close of year. If one of these was a G code, it would, then the KDE KDE determined status would be graduated. If it was a W-24, moved whereabouts unknown, then the status would be the KDE calculated or determined status would be dropout. Because if you don't know where the student went, they're considered a dropout. If it's a W-25 dropout, then it would be dropout. So that's why there are sometimes differing situations on the report. The diploma type on the report comes from the graduation tab. So that's entered in the graduation tab. Some situations we run into quite a bit this year. And this isn't, I ran this a long time ago. So, but for example, if I've seen a lot of situations where it would say, this would say W-25 dropout. So then the KDE SPED exit status will be dropout. But this, maybe you all entered, maybe the DOS entered, or the whoever it was, entered move known to continue. So those students are actually considered dropped out. If they do not enroll somewhere else in the state, they are considered dropout. Here's a good example: moved whereabouts unknown. So the KDE determined SPED exit status is dropped out. Somebody entered moved known to continue, but dropped out. This needs to be changed to dropped out because that is the actual status for the student. And it's something else you can look at is this column over here. This says state final enrollment. So this will tell you if you have moved known to continue, but it's the last enrollment for the student, that should be a red flag for you. There's another example. Some other things we've seen, the disability, I mentioned this earlier, the disability missing. There are a lot of reasons why that might happen, and I can help walk you through it. If a student transfers to homeschool, that would be moved known to continue. And that should be the final state enrollment. Or if they moved out of state, again, moved known to continue. But that would be the final state enrollment because they didn't enroll in another district. I've also seen the situation where somebody put dropped out, but then they did enroll somewhere else during the school year. The other thing to keep in mind on this is that the report only looks at July 1 through June 30th. of the current school year. So if the student disappeared in April and then showed back up again the middle of July, that student is still considered a dropout because it only looks through June 30th. Again, requirements from OSEP, Office of Special Education Programs. We have seen something else to keep in mind on this is that sometimes, because the kid had to be enrolled somewhere in the district by October 1st. So they may have been enrolled in a district on October 1st and moved 3 times since then. So they may not have been enrolled in your district before October 1st, but they will still be on your report because they were moved on to continue for another district, but then they show up in your district if, you know. And so we need to keep that in mind. So if a student has not had an IEP in your district but is on the report, you might need to check into that. It's a really good check to look for things. So I think the main thing to keep in mind is just the graduation rate and the dropout rate and the calculations for this. It definitely narrows the field. So any small change makes a big difference, unfortunately. But it's how we've been told to calculate it. So that was short and sweet. Does anybody have any questions, comments?
Amy, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So you have on your screen right now the dropout rate.
Mm-hmm.
So if I had a kid that graduated alternate diploma, let's say this year, and I marked them that way, so they're going to count on my exit report, right?
Yes.
They come back because they're going to turn 21, let's say December.
Yeah.
So then, if I mark them maximum age in December, they'll count on my report again. So then I get dinged twice.
So that's an excellent question, Jamie. It's almost like I set you up to ask that, and I didn't, but thank you. No, I'm glad you asked. So that's a question I've been getting a lot, and so it's all about that. It's all about how you exit them. So if you go ahead and give them the G code, and then say put in like graduated with alternate diploma and the SPED exit status, that's fine. We recommend that you wait, but that's fine. But then if they come back next year, just don't, when they end the school year, make it a CO1. Just make it a regular end of school or whatever. I think it's a CO1, even if it's mid-year, for students with alternate diploma. And then just don't put an exit status for them. So basically you're right. You only want them to show up one time on the report. So that's the way I would recommend it. What I really recommend is don't go ahead and give the G code. You can go ahead and put the diploma in, but don't go ahead and give the G code and don't put in the status. Just use a CO1 for the school year until they like turn 21 and exit, and then put in the G code and the exit. That's what I recommend, just to cut down on confusion. A lot of districts don't like to do it that way. So either way is fine.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. There was a question in the chat. Is alternate diploma still considered a dropout? It was never considered a dropout, but it is not considered a graduate either. So it doesn't show up in the dropped out, but it does show up in the denominator. So it's not going to count as a graduate. But it's not really a dropout either. It's neither. And then I made corrections where there were blanks, but I run the report and there are still spaces. So I think the reason for that is probably, and I don't know for sure, but probably because the report only updates on Mondays. So when you go in and put in the statuses, um, it'll take until, or actually it updates over the weekend. So on Monday, when you run it again, it should still be good. If that doesn't happen, let me know. Elizabeth, you have a question? I think you're muted. Okay, anybody else have a question? Those were good questions. I'm glad you guys. Oh, yeah.
Yes, Amy, this is Elizabeth. I do have a question about SAR end of year reporting. We did have a student that aged out at 21, and they had the G code. The special ed exit date was the same date as the date they turned 21. It caused us to lose funding. Have you had any other questions on that?
No.
Okay.
You might need to email that to me because I'm going to need to talk to somebody else about it.
Okay, perfect. I sure will. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Because I'm going to need to go through finance to figure that one out.
Okay.
Sounds like a good question.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, something else I wanted to talk about. I don't know what triggered my thought here, but what I have seen, another thing I've seen is transfer to regular education, and maybe these two dates are different. Maybe the SPED exit date on enrollment and the KDE determined SPED exit status are different. Now, for them to be 4 years different, there's a problem. But like they might be a couple of weeks difference. And the KDE determined SPED exit date is looking at the last IEP end date. So if a student transfers to regular ed, but you don't end date the IEP, those two dates are going to be different. If it's only a couple of weeks, I don't think it matters that much. It's not gonna hurt anything. If it's a year apart, you may need to look at that kid and make sure everything was done appropriately. But and that's so these yellow, the fact that these cells are yellow usually, but not always, indicates that there's an issue. It could be a situation like that where the end dates are, close, but not quite, but it's fine. So any other questions? I do recommend that you take a look at this report and look at it closely. There's a lot, and I know there's a lot, sometimes maybe too much, but it's there to help you troubleshoot. Another issue that we've seen is this might say general diploma under the diploma type, but maybe the special ed exit status is 03, graduated with with alternate diploma. So you're going to have to talk to whoever puts in the information in your graduation tab, if that's the case. Any other questions? On the report, I have a student listed as dropped out, but he returned to homeschool, but it was several months after his end status. So I'm going to have to look at that one, David. That's like an individual kid kind of thing. So homeschool, we don't have as much control over it, so it's hard to tell what's going on there. So we'll take a look at it. So to get access to the SPED exit detail report, be sure you talk to your cases administrator, your IC administrator. They may have to grant rights to you because it's a different kind of report. I don't really know what those rights are because that's not my world, but um, every case administrator I've talked to hasn't had a problem with it once they figured out where it was. So you shouldn't have a problem. And if you do, feel free to email me. All right. Well, that was pretty quick. I hope it helped. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to email me. And I will, if a bunch of them come through, I'll make an FAQ document and send it out. Some other unrelated to exit report news. The Infinite Campus forms have been updated, so there are no longer